In the winter of 1886, archaeologists opened a grave in the Egyptian town of Qumran. Inside lay a body, most likely a monk, and buried with him a small book of parchment. He had been laid to rest with rejected words on his chest. Part of that book was the Gospel of Peter, a text the early church had refused. Bound with it were 32 chapters of something far stranger, the Greek text of a book that had survived complete only in the mountains of Ethiopia, in which a man walks through the sky, sees the machinery of heaven, and finds stars in chains, not fallen angels. Stars, punished, the text says, for one specific crime. They did not come forth at their appointed times. They were late. The codex from that grave is known today as Codex Panopolitanus, catalogued in Cairo as Papyrus Cairo 10,759. It restored a substantial portion of the Book of Enoch in Greek, a language far closer to the book's early transmission than the Ethiopian copies European scholars had been working from, and it carried with it a preoccupation that almost nobody talks about when they talk about Enoch. Not giants, not forbidden knowledge. Time. The Book of Enoch is not a single book. It is an ancient Jewish apocalyptic anthology, 5 separate compositions gathered under one name and attributed to Enoch, the great-grandfather of Noah, the figure Genesis describes as walking with God. Scholars call it First Enoch. Its complete text survives only in Ge'ez, the classical liturgical language of Ethiopia, where it is not a curiosity but canonical scripture in the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church. Those 5 parts are usually divided like this: the Book of the Watchers, the opening 36 chapters, which holds the famous material about angels who descend to earth; the Book of Parables, the Astronomical book, the Book of Dream Visions, and a closing section often called the Epistle of Enoch. They were not written in the same moment, and they do not all share the same concerns. Treating them as one seamless prophecy is the first mistake most readers make. It was never part of the Hebrew Bible. That distinction matters because the most popular claim made about this book is false. No church council removed Enoch from the Bible. It was never voted out because it was never voted in. What actually happened is quieter and more interesting. It was read, respected, and quoted, including in the New Testament letter of Jude, which draws directly on the opening chapter of First Enoch, and then slowly left behind by most traditions while one tradition kept copying it. For centuries, Western Europe knew the book only through fragments and second-hand quotations. Then, in 1773, the Scottish traveller James Bruce returned from Ethiopia carrying Ge'ez manuscripts of the complete work. In 1821, Richard Lawrence, working at Oxford, published the first English translation. The wording most people quote today descends largely from a later translation by R. H. Charles, published in 1917, and that is the translation used throughout this film. So, by the time that grave at Qumran was opened, Europe already had Enoch. What it did not have was the older, harder evidence of how far back this material went. That would come from a different desert entirely. Among the Dead Sea Scrolls recovered from the caves at Qumran were fragments of Enoch in Aramaic, the book's likely original language. They were published by the scholar J.T. Millick in 1976, and the dating pushed the oldest material back to roughly the 3rd century before the Common Era. That is centuries earlier than many had assumed. Enoch was not a late medieval oddity, it was old. And here is the detail that reorients everything. The earliest Enochic material at Qumran was not the celebrated writing about fallen angels. Among the oldest fragments was the astronomical writing, including copies of what scholars call the Astronomical book, one of them catalogued as 4Q208, before the Watchers, before the Nephilim, before any of the material that made this book famous on the internet. The tradition was already writing about the sky and about the counting of days. Chapters 72 to 82 of 1st Enoch contain that astronomical book, and it reads nothing like apocalyptic vision. It reads like a technical manual. The angel Uriel takes Enoch through the workings of the heavens and shows him the system. The sun does not simply rise. It rises through gates, 6 of them in the east and 6 in the west, moving from gate to gate as the seasons turn. The moon has its own portals and its own reckoning. The stars have assigned stations. The winds have designated doors. Every luminary has a route, a schedule, and a jurisdiction. Heaven, in this account, is not mystery. Heaven is mechanism, a vast, ordered, legible machine, and the point of showing it to Enoch is that its order can be known, written down, and obeyed. Then you start counting, and you arrive at a number. Follow the scheme the astronomical book lays out, and the year comes to exactly 364 days, not 365, 364. At first, that looks like a mistake. It is not. 364 is 52 weeks precisely, with nothing left over, and a year that divides cleanly into whole weeks does something no other calendar can do. Every year begins on the same day of the week. Every festival lands on the same weekday, permanently, forever. Passover always falls on the same day. The Day of Atonement always falls on the same day. And crucially, a festival can never collide with the Sabbath because the pattern never shifts. It is not an approximation of the sky. It is a calendar built so that sacred time never contradicts itself. There is, of course, a problem, and it is the obvious one. The actual solar year is closer to 365 and a quarter days. A strict count of 364 falls behind the sun by more than a day every year. Within a couple of decades, harvest festivals would drift out of the harvest. Within a lifetime, the calendar and the seasons would visibly part company. Whether the people who used this calendar corrected that drift, and if so, how, is genuinely unresolved. Scholars have proposed intercalation schemes. The surviving texts do not clearly describe one. This is one of the real open questions in the study of ancient Jewish timekeeping, and anyone who tells you it is settled is overselling the evidence. But the Book of Enoch has an answer of its own, and it is not an astronomical answer. It is a moral one. Chapter 80 warns that in the days of the sinners the years shall be shortened. It says the moon shall alter her order and not appear at her time. Read that carefully, because the logic runs backwards from everything a modern reader expects. The text is not saying that the calendar has fallen out of step with the sky. It is saying that the sky has fallen out of step with itself, and that human corruption is the reason. In this worldview, sin does not merely offend heaven. Sin disturbs it. Moral decay propagates upward into the machinery of the cosmos, and the visible symptom of a corrupted age is that time itself stops behaving. We assume astronomy corrects religion. Enoch insists that wickedness distorts astronomy. Which brings us back to the stars in chains. The passage sits in chapters 18 and 21, inside the older book of the Watchers. Enoch is carried to the edge of the world, to a place he describes as a void, with neither heaven above nor firmly founded earth beneath. And there he sees 7 stars, bound together like great mountains, burning with fire. He asks what they have done. His angelic guide answers that these are of the number of the stars of heaven, which have transgressed the commandment of the Lord, and are bound here until 10,000 years, the time entailed by their sins, are completed. And elsewhere in the same passage the offense is stated plainly. They transgressed the commandment of the Lord in the beginning of their rising, because they did not come forth at their appointed times. That is the crime, not rebellion, not lust, not the teaching of forbidden arts, punctuality. 7 stars are imprisoned in a burning void for 10,000 years because they failed to appear on schedule. It is worth pausing on how strange that is, and on why almost nobody notices it. This scene sits only verses away from the imprisonment of the Watchers, the angels punished for descending to earth. 2 prisons, 2 sentences, adjacent in the text. Readers have conflated them for centuries, folding the late stars into the story of the fallen angels, because that story is the one everyone came for. But the text distinguishes them. And once you see the distinction, the priorities of these authors become uncomfortably clear. In the moral universe of this book, breaking the schedule of heaven is not a minor infraction. It is a cosmic offense, punished on a cosmic timescale. So why would anyone write this? Why would keeping time correctly matter enough to imprison stars over it? Because it was an argument, and the argument had an address. The community at Qumran, which preserved the oldest surviving copies of Enoch, used a 364-day calendar. Its own scrolls set out that fixed weekly scheme in detail, assigning priestly duties and festivals to unchanging days. This was not an abstract interest. It governed their religious life. Meanwhile, the temple in Jerusalem, the center of Jewish worship, reckoned its calendar with reference to the moon. That lunar reckoning is the ancestor of the Jewish calendar still in use today. Many scholars read the Enochic and Qumranic calendar material as polemic, as a sustained argument against lunar reckoning and against the authorities who used it. If that reading is right, the implication is severe. It would mean this group believed that every festival being celebrated in the temple in Jerusalem by the official priesthood on the holiest days of the year was being observed on the wrong date. Not slightly wrong. Wrong in the sense that heaven did not recognize it. That interpretation is widely held among specialists. It is not a proven fact, and it deserves to be labeled as interpretation rather than certainty. Nor does it resolve the awkward question of the drift, because a calendar that loses a day a year is not obviously the more accurate witness to the heavens. Both sides of this ancient dispute had a problem. Only one side had the temple. And that, in the end, is why this forgotten quarrel is worth 15 minutes of your attention. Every calendar you have ever lived by is a decision enforced by authority, not a fact of nature. Julius Caesar imposed one reform. In 1582, a papal correction produced the Gregorian calendar that most of the world now runs on, and countries adopted it decades, and in some cases, centuries apart, which is why the same historical week can carry 2 different dates depending on where you look. And the switch was never clean. Different countries adopted the Gregorian reform decades, and in some cases centuries, apart. 2 nations could sit on opposite shores of the same sea in the same week and disagree about what the date was. Time was never a neutral measurement. It was always a jurisdiction. The authors of Enoch are among the earliest recorded voices to argue that official time and true time had come apart. That the days everyone agreed on were not the days heaven was counting. They lost that argument comprehensively. The temple fell, the sect vanished, and their calendar went with them. The book survived anyway, not because it was protected by any council or hidden by any conspiracy, but because Ethiopian monasteries kept copying it, generation after generation, long after everyone else had stopped. A manuscript tradition outlasted the temple, the sect, and the calendar it was written to defend, and a Greek portion of it was found in a grave in Akhmim, buried with a man who apparently wanted it near him. If you enjoy forgotten books and arguments that were never actually settled, subscribe, because there is a new piece of forgotten history here every week. But before you go, sit with the question these authors were willing to imprison stars over. If the calendar on your wall were wrong, would you want to know?